Okay, we are on. Welcome back. Um, we are on 35, 3, I think. 35, 3, Lamed Hey Amid Aleph. Testayim on the right side. Testayim Rav Yossi the Amma. Let's just bring everybody, let's bring up to date. The Gemara said, the Mishnah stated that Orla, an estrog of Orla, as you know, is a tree that grew, produce that grew in the first 3 years of a tree. The Torah says you can't eat it. And also we learn that you can't eat it, you can't benefit from Orla. That first 3 years of the fruit. And the Mishnah states you can't use an Orla fruit for an esrog. And the Gemara is trying to understand, why can't I use a Orla fruit for an esrog? So the Gemara says, the machlokas is, the Torah says, L'kachtem lachem, b'yom harishon. The Torah says you have to take lachem. Something that's yours, lachem, belongs to you. You have to take b'yom harishon, you have to take an esrog, that's yours. And if you can't have benefit from it, you can't eat it. So the Gemara says that everybody holds, in order for you to fulfill the mitzvah of etrog, you have to be able to eat the etrog. If you can't eat, if you don't have a right to eat the etrog, then it's not called lachem. It's not called yours. And the Gemara illustrates that from the Mishnah that says truma that became contaminated. Truma, as we know, is eaten by the Kohanim. If truma becomes contaminated, that truma cannot be eaten by Kohanim. It's burnt. You could use, the Kohen could use it as fuel, but he can't use it for eating. And the Mishnah states truma that became, if let's say you have an etrog that was truma, that the person grew etrogim in his field, and he separated some etrogim for truma for the Kohen, and subsequently afterwards, let's say he gave it to the Kohen, and then subsequently it became tameh, became contaminated. So the law is that the Kohen cannot use that etrog for the mitzvah of etrog. Why? Because you can't eat it. Once it became contaminated, you can't eat it. The question is, the Gemara says, something that you could eat, something that you have right to eat, but you don't have ownership in. What's the halacha of such an etrog? What's the case? What the case is, let's say Ma'aser Sheni, according to Reb Meir. What's the story of Ma'aser Sheni? As you know, you take 10%. The 6-year cycle, then comes Shemitah. So the first 2 years, and it's repeated the 4th and the 5th year, 10% goes to Yerushalayim. And that 10% that goes to Yerushalayim, you need to. Good morning, Mr. Haber. The 10% that goes to Yerushalayim, you in Yerushalayim. The question is, whose food is that Ma'aser Sheni? It was your Ma'aser Sheni. It was you're bringing it to Yerushalayim. You're eating in Yerushalayim. Levium is a Ma'aser Rishon. But you give 10% every year of the 6 years. What do you say? That's the 3rd and 6th year. That's called Ma'aser Ani. There's a whole cycle. Just to review the cycle. Mr. Haber, are you able to hear me? The cycle goes like this. The first year, every year of the 6 years, every year you gotta give truma. The Kohen gets every year. You gotta now how much you have to give to the Kohen? The average Kohen, the average person gives 1/50th, 2% to the Kohen. The Torah does not give us a measurement how much you have to give to the Kohen. A guy with a good eye gives 2.5%, gives 1/40th. A guy with a bad eye, a stingy guy, gives 1/60th. The average guy, the Mida Bain is 1/50th. That's what the Gemara, that's what it says. Bainani. Then we have, so every year, right, you gotta give Ma'aser Sheni. Every year you gotta give Ma'aser Rishon. Every year you got to give 10% to the Levi. So we got every year the Kohen gets Truma. And after the Kohen gets Truma, the first tithe, that's why it's called Maaser Rishon, the first tithe is 10% to the Levi. He gets 10% every year. In the first year of the cycle and the second year of the cycle, post Shemitah, there's Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe. That second tithe, right, is brought to Yerushalayim and is eaten in Jerusalem. You eat it yourself, your family members eat it. That's the Ma'aser Sheni. Right, that's at the third year. That's after 3 years. Morning, Jaime.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good to see you back.
Thank you.
Yeah, I take attendance. You know that. That's the
Well
joke.
aware.
Yes. Okay. We're discussing our Gemara was talking about an etrog from Orla. The first 3 years of a tree, the Torah says you can't eat the produce the first 3 years. That whatever grows the first 3 years, you can't eat it. I don't want coffee. Thank you, Mr. Haber. You can't eat the produce the first 3 years. And the Mishnah states that you cannot use the produce of the first 3 years. You cannot use it for etrog. Now, the question is, what's the reason why you can't use the produce of Orla the first 3 years for etrog? So one opinion of the Gemara says the reason is, well, since I can't eat it, that's the problem, because I can't eat it. And if you will find, because the Torah says you can't eat the Orla. But let's say you have a food that you have a right to eat, but it doesn't belong to you. Can you use it as an etrog? Can you fulfill your requirement of etrog? So the Torah says, "Ulakachtem lachem." You take something that's yours. Is it called yours? This opinion, one opinion says, as long as you're able to eat it, even if you don't actually have ownership of it, it's not yours. It's called, that's enough yours that you can fulfill your mitzvah. So therefore, the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Meir says that when you take off Ma'aser Sheni, the second Ma'aser Sheni, as we said, the first and second year of the cycle, and the fourth and the fifth year of the cycle, 6 years leading up to Shemitah, you take 10% of your produce and you bring it to Yerushalayim, and you, the owner of the produce, eats in Yerushalayim. The question is, when you separate that second Ma'aser Sheni, you're eating Yerushalayim, who does the Ma'aser Sheni belong to? Does the Ma'aser Sheni belong to Hashem? And Hashem says, I want you to eat it in Jerusalem. Or does the Ma'aser Sheni belong to you? That is a question in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, could a man betroth a woman with Ma'aser Sheni, produce that you bring into Yerushalayim? If you say that it's your money, but you just have certain restrictions, you have to eat it in Jerusalem, and if you can't carry the fruit to Jerusalem, you redeem it on coins, and you take the coins and you buy produce in Jerusalem. If it's your money, then you can betroth a woman technically with the Ma'aser Sheni fruit. If the Ma'aser Sheni doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God, and you're eating off of God's food, you're eating off His table, so then it's not yours to betroth a woman. A woman, you got to give her something that belongs to you. Say it again.
Probably, so you can't do condition with it. Probably, my guess is because it has conditions. Even if you were to argue that it's yours, everybody agrees that that's conditions.
Yeah, because there might be certain holders.
You give somebody, you have to do this, but here's the condition.
Yeah, but it's still. It seems that the Gemara would say that depending whether you view Ma'aser Sheni, that type, as belonging to you, or do you view it as belongs to Hashem, is whether you have the ability to betroth a woman with the Ma'aser Sheni. There's a machloket to Rav Meir and the Chachamim. So now the Gemara says, according to Rav Meir says that Ma'aser Sheni belongs to Hashem. It doesn't belong to you. So the Gemara wanted to say, what would Rav Meir hold if you have Ma'aser Sheni? Can you fulfill your mitzvah of etrog an etrog of Ma'aseh Sheni, can you use it for the mitzvah of etrog? Right? So according to now, if you hold that as long as you have a right to eat it, that's good enough. You fulfill the mitzvah of etrog. It's considered lachem, considered enough yours. So then you have a right to eat the Ma'aseh Sheni. You eat the Ma'aseh Sheni in Jerusalem. So therefore, you should be able to use technically. If you went ahead and you went in and you used the etrog of Ma'aseh Sheni, you should be able to fill your mitzvah of etrog because it's lachem. Maybe lechatchila, ideally you shouldn't use it. The Gemara will explain why. But if you went ahead and you used it, you should be able to get credit. But if you say it's not enough that you have the right to eat it, you have to have ownership in it. It has to be yours.
Completely.
So if it's not yours, if you don't have any monetary holdings in the item, so then you do not be able to fulfill the mitzvah of etrog. So that's what the Gemara says. And the Gemara says that this is a matter of dispute of two rabbis in the Gemara. The two rabbis are arguing how much does it have to be, what is required? Is it required that as long as you're able to eat the etrog, that's enough to be called lachem? It's yours enough that you can fulfill the mitzvah? Or you actually have to have a financial ownership on that etrog. And if it's not yours, if it's Hashem's, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah. So the Gemara brought two rabbis that are arguing in this situation. The Gemara said it was Rav Chia bar Ravin and Rav Asi. And the Gemara did not know which rabbi said which. They know that these two rabbis are arguing on this issue. But when the Gemara reported the argument, it wasn't reported that this rabbi says that and that rabbi says that. Rather, it was reported, Mr. Haber, that the two rabbis argued in this case. One rabbi said this, one rabbi that said that, but we did not identify which rabbi said what. What the Gemara is going to do today is going to identify which rabbi said what. And it's important to note which rabbi says what, because sometimes you have rules when two rabbis argue with each other. Sometimes there's rules that this rabbi is the more expert rabbi in this subject. And therefore, if we can identify which rabbi says what, then maybe the halacha, the law, would indicate to us more where the law would follow. So that's what the Gemara today on 35a3 starts off. Tistayim, let us prove the Rav Asi, the Omar Lefi she'ein bo demamot. Let us prove Rav Asi is the one who says that you have to have a ownership and financial holding in the etrog in order for you to fulfill your mitzvah of etrog. If you don't have a financial ownership, even if you have a right to eat it, it's not enough. How do we prove that? The Gemara says, the Omar of Asi. The Asi went on record. Etrog Shamaisa Sheni. An etrog of Maisa Sheni, L'divrei Rameya. According to Rameya, that says that Maisa Sheni does not belong to the owner. He said that Maisa Sheni belongs to Hashem. When you separate that tithe, even though you're eating it in Jerusalem, it belongs to Hashem. And once you separated it, it's like it's given to Hashem. Except Hashem says, I want you to eat it in Jerusalem. So according to Rameya, Ein Adam Yotzei Idei Chavoto B'Yom Tov. You cannot fulfill your obligation of an etrog of Maisa Sheni on Yom Tov. Why not? Because you do not have financial ownership in that etrog. But L'divrei Chachamim, but according to the Chachamim, Adam Yotzei Idei Chavoto B'Yom Tov. But the Chachamim who argue on Rameya, the Chachamim say that Maisa Sheni belongs to you. The owner of the produce that separated the Maisa Sheni, the second tithe, right? You gave Maisa Rishon means first, Sheni means second. The first 10% gave to the Levi, but the second 10% Maisa Sheni you bring to Yerushalayim. It's yours, the Chacham hold. Except it's yours as Adam said there's some limitations, some restrictions. Hashem says, where I want you to eat this thing that belongs to you.
You know what kind of so like the money to pay for taxes is not yours, that's the government's. But any kind of pre-tax deduction,
It belongs to you.
yeah, like you can use it to buy business expenses, it's yours, but
There's certain rules, certain restrictions.
it's like a little bit of a gray area.
Okay,
Deduction,
so that's very good. So the Gemara says to stay. So the Gemara concludes, yes, we have proved that it's Rav Asi that says that you have to have not just the right to eat the etrog, you have to have the financial ownership of the etrog. Now the Gemara says, Gufa. Now the Gemara is going to analyze this statement. Gufa, Amar Rav Asi, etrog shal ma'aseh sheni, an etrog of ma'aseh sheni. The Divi Rameya, according to Rameya, that holds that the etrog belongs to Hashem, that ma'aseh sheni, the tithe, once just like when you make a karban, when you make an offering, you designate an animal. Let's say you own an animal, you say, I want this animal to be a karban. When you consecrated the animal, you sanctify the animal, it's no longer yours, right? It belongs to Hashem, it belongs to Hekdesh. There's certain things sometimes, there's certain types of things you can redeem, certain things you can't redeem. Maybe when something gets a blemish, you can redeem it. But by you consecrating it, when you say Hari is the Hekdesh, I'm going to donate this item is holy. It left my domain, and now it belongs to Hashem. I consecrated it. So here also, Rameya says that the Ma'aseh Sheni, this tithe, when I separate that second 10%, it belongs to Hashem. Hashem says, I want you to eat it in Yerushalayim. Now, different Chachamim, Adam Yotzei Dechavot B'Pesach. So we said there's a dispute by Ma'aseh Sheni whether Rameya holds you cannot fulfill your obligation of the etrog of Ma'aseh Sheni, or Chacham say you can. So the Gemara says, Matzah shel Ma'aseh Sheni. What about matzah? Now we're going around the year, right? The cycle. Here we talked about Sukkot. Now we're talking about Pesach. What's the law with matzah from Ma'aseh Sheni? That means I went ahead, I had wheat, and I separated during the first and second year of the cycle, and the fourth or fifth year, I separated 10% to bring to Yerushalayim. And now, can I use that? Can I make matzah? Now I eat it. I can make matzah. I eat the wheat in Yerushalayim. Now, can I go ahead and use that wheat for matzah to fill my obligation? The first night of Pesach, I have an obligation, like by the Seder, to have matzah. Can I fulfill my obligation of matzah by using matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni? Now, usually, what matzah do you use? You use your own matzah. You take wheat, mundane wheat, not Ma'aseh Sheni wheat, not special holy food, not food that has restrictions. You generally take a regular mundane wheat and you make matzah from it. But here the question is, I'm using Ma'aseh Sheni wheat. Is that clear, Mr. Haber? Mm-hmm. I'm using wheat that was Ma'aseh Sheni. And I went ahead and I baked some beautiful, delicious matzah. I made sure it's kosher. It was watched l'shem mitzvahs matzah. It was shmura matzah. It was the real deal. And now the question is, Rabbi, can I use this matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni to fulfill my mitzvah? What did you say? So that's what we're going to get to. So can I fulfill my mitzvah of matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni? So what does the Gemara say? The Gemara says the same idea. Matzah shel Ma'aseh Sheni, matzah that from this second tithe, the Divi Rameya, according to Rameya, that says that Ma'aseh Sheni, it's called Mammon Gavoha. It's called money of the exalted of Hashem. Doesn't belong to you. You only have certain rights to it. You can eat it, but it doesn't belong to you. You're like a guest at Hashem's table. On that tithe, Hashem says, I want you could eat it in Yerushalayim. So, Mata Shammai said, Divrei Meir, contra Meir, Ein Adam Yotzei Dechavot Pesach. You cannot fulfill your obligation with matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni on Pesach because it's not owned by you. But Divrei Chachamim, but according to the Chachamim, Adam Yotzei Dechavot Pesach. According to the Chachamim, you can fulfill your obligation with matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni on Pesach. Why? Because the Chachamim hold that Ma'aseh Sheni, that tithe, still belongs to you. The Torah just says you got to eat it in Jerusalem, but it's yours. It never left your domain. That's case two. So far we had the case of etrog of Ma'aseh Sheni, where we said there'll be a dispute, matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni, and now we're coming to a third case. Isa shel Ma'aseh Sheni. Isa is dough. Is dough of Ma'aseh Sheni. You know, you have the halacha. Good morning. You have the halacha of challah, right? When you make a dough, a certain amount of dough, you have to take off a piece of the dough, certain measurement of the dough, and you give it to the kohen. Today we take off kazayits, we take off about an ounce, and we don't give it to the kohen. They burn that piece of dough today. So Isa Shamaisa Sheni. The question is, if let's say I have dough, this dough is Maisa Sheni dough, right? It's wheat from the Maisa Sheni. I brought to Yerushalayim, and I made dough. I want to make challah for Shabbat. And I have this Maisa Sheni dough. Now the question is, do I have to separate some challah? Usually, now in the Ashkenaz community, where you say usually, if you make between 2.5 and 5 pounds of flour, you have to separate a piece for challah. But if you have 5 pounds of dough, then you go ahead and you would actually say a bracha. You would say a bracha on that separation. We have to see what the Sfardim hold. Right. So according to Rav Meir, so the question is, what's the story with Isa Shel Ma'aseh Sheni? The dough of Ma'aseh Sheni, do I have to go ahead and separate challah? So let's say I have a nice big dough. I have 5 pounds of flour. I have a beautiful big dough. It's a big simcha. Someone's celebrating something, and they're making a lot of dough. Do they need to separate challah from the dough to give to the kohen? So the Gemara says, according to Rav Meir, according to Rav Meir, you're patur from challah. Rav Meir would hold, since Rav Meir says Ma'aseh Sheni belongs to Hashem, it's not yours. It's just Hashem is telling you, I'm giving you the right to eat it in Yerushalayim, but it doesn't belong to you. So if it doesn't belong to you, when the Torah says the obligation of separating challah, the Torah says from your dough, the best of your dough, reishit arisotechem, from your dough you have to separate challah. But if it's not your dough, why isn't it your dough? Because it belongs to Mum Gavoah, belongs to Hashem. Good morning, Boker Tov. If it's not your dough, you don't have to separate challah. So therefore, the Divrei Rav Meir peturim min challah. According to Rav Meir, you're exempt from challah. The Divrei Chachamim chayevet b'challah. And according to the Chachamim, you're chayav b'challah. Now we're turning the page. So now, the Gemara we had 3 cases here in the Gemara, where the Gemara equated all 3 cases and says the law is the same in all 3 cases. If it's dough of Ma'aseh Sheni, if it's etrog of Ma'aseh Sheni, if it's matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni, the Gemara says in all three cases, Rameya would hold one way, the Chacham would hold something else. Based on their argument of whether Ma'aseh Sheni belongs to you or Ma'aseh Sheni belongs to Hashem. But the Gemara is going to try to understand why is the law the way we just presented it. Look what the Gemara says. Maskif lo Rav Papa. Rav Papa asked the following question. Bishlama Isa. I can understand the case of dough. I can understand, excuse me, the case of the dough of Ma'aseh Sheni, the tithe, the second tithe you brought to Yerushalayim. I can understand why there would be a dispute. Why? Bishlamit, he said, the Torah says you have to go ahead and take off from your dough. It has to be your dough. From your dough, you take off challah. You got to give challah to the Kohen from your dough. So if Rameya holds Ma'aseh Sheni is not your dough, because Rameya holds that Ma'aseh Sheni belongs to Hashem, so therefore you have no responsibility, right? Is that clear, of taking off Ma'aseh? The Chachamim will hold that Ma'aseh Sheni belongs to you. It is your dough, right? Is that clear? The fundamental dispute between Rameya and the Chachamim is whether Ma'aseh Sheni is yours or not. Is it belong to you, the second tithe, that you're bringing to Yerushalayim, it's yours, or is it belong to Hashem? So I understand. And also, Etrog Nami. I can understand why there's a dispute by Etrog. Why should there be a dispute by Etrog? Because Ksiv Lachem, when the Torah says that you take an Etrog, it says Lakachtem Lachem. The Torah emphasizes that it needs to belong to Lachem, something that's yours. And if the etrog is owned by Hashem, because according to Rameya, an etrog is Mammon Gavoa, belongs to Hashem, it's not yours. It's Hashem, that Hashem is telling you to eat it, giving you it to eat, but it's not yours. It's Lachem, it's Lachem. Ela Matzah, the Gemara is trying to understand the law of Matzah. Ela Matzah, Miksiv, Matzat Chem. Did the Torah ever say that you have to own the matzah? When the Torah says, what does the Torah say? The Torah says, Be'erev tochlu matzot, right? At night, the night of the 15th of the month of Nisan, you have to eat matzah. It doesn't say lachem. It doesn't say matzah lachem. There's no lachem. Like, we've been talking about etro, lakachtem, lachem. As the Torah by etrog emphasizes the lachem, the yours. When it comes to challah, reshid arisotechem, the first of your dough. It talks about yours, your ownership. But when it comes to matzah, we don't find that it has to be yours. But don't find that it has to be yours. So why would Rameya require that it has to be yours by matzah? And therefore, Rameya, since he holds Ma'aseh Sheni, does not belong to you. It belongs to Hashem. So Rameya says you cannot fulfill your obligation of Matzah of Ma'aseh Sheni. But why? Where do we find the requirement? Good morning. Where do we find the requirement? Morning. Where do we find the requirement that has to belong to you? So to that, the Gemara says, Oma Rabba Bar Shmuel. Rabba Bar Shmuel v'itema Rav Yema Bar Shlemya. Rabba Bar Shmuel, and some say it was Rav Yema, the son of Shlemya. He says there's Zera Shaveh. There's the Torah uses the same word twice in two different situations to tell you a certain law. Ksiv hacha. Regarding matzah, regarding the law of matzah, it says lechem oni. The Torah says that it has bread of your affliction. Right? We know matzah is not is something that's very dry. It's not sweetened dough. It's not a rich dough. It's not matzah shira. It's not made. It's called lechem oni, bread of affliction, which represents the matzah represents the dough that we had in Egypt. We're learning about the Sefer Shemot. We're learning about the slavery of the Jewish people. And the slavery of the Jewish people, the Egyptians they didn't give them tasty bread to eat. The bread they gave them to eat was matzah. Matzah lasts a long time. You stay full from the matzah a long time. It's not sweet. It's called lechem oni. It's the bread of affliction. What did you say? We're now 30. We're at the bottom of the page on the Hebrew side. We're on the last line of the page. And on the English side, we're on the right side of 35a4. So the Gemara says, Atya lechem lechem. Sivhacha, just to bring you up to date, we're trying to understand, Rameya holds matzah from Maaseh Sheni, from your second tithe, that you have to take off the first and second and fourth and fifth year of the cycle, morning. That second tithe, the Torah says you have to bring to Yerushalayim. You have to eat in Yerushalayim. And Rav Meir holds that Maaseh Sheni, even though you're eating in Yerushalayim, it doesn't belong to you. Rav Meir holds that second tithe, that the Torah says, I want you to Yerushalayim, really, once you separate it, it belongs to Hashem. It's called Mamon Gavoha, money of the exalted one, of the Most High. It doesn't belong to you. Rather, Hashem, God says, it belongs to me once you separated it, but I want you to eat it in Jerusalem. And Rameya says, because of that fact, that it doesn't belong to you, that the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say that Maaseh Sheni really belongs to you. It really belongs to the owner of the wheat, or whatever you take off Maaseh Sheni, except the Torah says, I want you to eat your produce, the second tithe that you separate, I want you, the 10%, I want you to eat in Yerushalayim, but it belongs to you. But Rameya says it doesn't belong to you. Because it doesn't belong to you, Rameya says, you cannot fulfill your obligation of matzah. Because you don't own it. It belongs to Hashem. But the Gemara's question is, so what? It belongs to Hashem. Where do we have a requirement that matzah has to belong to you in order for you to fulfill the obligation? The Torah nowhere says it has to be your matzah. When it comes to etrog, it says lachem, focused about being yours. But by matzah, good morning, it doesn't say anything about yours. So why is it that Rameya holds, if it's Maaseh Sheni, it doesn't belong to you, you have a right to eat it, why should that limit you from fulfilling your obligation of matzah? So the Gemara says, the Gemara says it's something called the Gzeira Shaveh. That sometimes the Torah uses the same word in two places. It uses the same word to teach you sometimes certain halakha, one haron. And what's the halakha that it's coming to teach you? It's coming to teach you we're connecting this law of matzah to the law of challah. And just like by challah, by using the same word, lechem, when it comes to challah, and it uses the same word lechem when it comes to matzah, so we say that the law that applies to challah applies to the law of matzah. That just like challah has to belong to you, so too the challah has to also. Such a challah has to belong to you, the matzah also has to belong to you. And if you don't own it, Rameya holds Maaseh Sheni you don't own, therefore you cannot fulfill your obligation. The Gemara says, Ksiv hachal lechem oni, Ksiv hatam, by challah it says, V'hoya ba'ach lechem milechem ha'aretz. When you eat from the bread of the land. So mal halan, when it comes to challah, it has to be mishelachem. You have to own it. You can't fulfill your obligation. There's no obligation of chala, of separating from your dough for the kohen if it doesn't belong to you. Afkan mishalachem v'lo mishal ma'aser. So too, when it comes to the mitzvah of matzah, it has to be similar to the mitzvah of challah. And therefore, you have to own, according to this opinion, you have to go ahead and own the matzah. Now, just to remember, why does Hashem says to take the 10% to Yerushalayim and eat in Yerushalayim? So the Sefer Chinuch says, because Hashem wants the people to come to the holy city of Jerusalem, spend time in Jerusalem, and there's the great rabbis in Jerusalem, the holy city. By spending time in the holy city, that will be a great influence on the family and the family members. Sometimes you'll send the children to Jerusalem to eat the food, and then the children will learn. They have food. Their expenses are paid. Therefore, they can have time to study, to educate themselves in Torah. They'll go back home and they'll educate their parents. So by Torah mandating that you have to eat 10% of your crop, the first and second, or fourth or fifth year in Jerusalem, that's going to have a very great influence on the family by creating a part of the structure. You have to spend time in the holy city. If we should take that lesson to life, sending children, ourselves to holy places, and that will be a great influence for us. So that's the idea of the Sefer Chinuch, why the Torah says you have to eat in Jerusalem. Why can't I eat it in Haifa? Why do I have to go to Jerusalem and eat the Ma'aser Sheni in Jerusalem? So the Sefer Chinuch says it's the holy city will have a great influence on the members of the family. I want to wish everyone, is that clear, Jaime?
Yes.
By taking to Jerusalem and eating it there, spending time there, so the children have the food. So what they have all the food expenses that they need. So maybe spending money on an apartment wasn't so expensive back then. So most probably had the food. So therefore people have the opportunity to study. I want to wish everyone a great day, and hopefully we'll see everyone back tomorrow. All the best, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.